Howdy, howdy. This is Dan Bracky again. I got a lot of positive feedback about that double thumb video that I put out just the other day. So, people were asking me to do something else. So, I figured I would do something else that people have kind of asked me about after seeing me play sometimes. And that is kind of improv solo-y stuff. Now, this is something I still think I completely suck at, but other people tend to ask me questions about it, and then I just have to kind of pretend that I know what I'm talking about. So, I'm going to kind of just give a basic run-through of my thought process while I'm doing improv, which is, it's not really part of the job all the time, but sometimes you got to do it, and sometimes you just got to suck it up and pretend you know what you're doing. And I know all about that. Alright, so what I've done, I made this little loop, and it's just 4 chords. It's actually taken from a Dave Matthews song. In case you didn't know, I kind of like the Dave Matthews Band. You can tell me once again that I completely suck. So, here's the loop. So it's just those 4 chords. And those 4 chords are A minor, B minor, E minor, and D. So, very simple. And it just loops round and round and round and round. Now, important things about soloing. Obviously, you want to know what key you're in. So, if we think about those chords, A minor, B minor, E minor, and D, what key are we in? When I think about it, there are a couple ways you could think about it. I think of E minor, straight up E, Aeolian, E minor. Now, you could also say, oh, I don't know, or maybe we're in A Dorian, or B Phrygian, or even D Mixolydian. But I think that sounds like home. That sounds like the key to me. So, in that case, how do we go about soloing over something like this? That is the true question. So let's play. Here's the loop. B minor. D. Now, before we get into it, let's talk quickly about how to go about this. The biggest problem most musicians have with soloing tends to be kind of playing very blandly, sticking in the key. Like, if I say this is an E minor, a lot of people would probably just go, which is fine, works. It's all E minor pentatonic, and that is exactly kind of what you should think about when starting to solo around with this kind of stuff. That works. Totally fine. But the fact that you're not just on an E, you're changing chords. You have also A minor, B minor, E minor, D, means you kind of need to switch it up a bit. And when you're playing E minor pentatonic over those other chords, it lacks distinction. You're missing a lot of the flavor notes in those other chords. Now, this is something I'm still not the greatest at, and it's just kind of working on outlining the other chords during your solo. So something, instead of doing this, and you can hear I was still kind of trying to land on notes that fit with the other chords that weren't the E minor, but at the same time, it still just kind of lacks some definition. So what I'm going to try to do, I may fail horribly, we'll see, I'll leave it in because then you can laugh at me. What I'm going to do, I'm going to try and outline some of the other chords as well. So I kind of tried to move around a bit. In the end, the thing that kind of sucks, I'm not as much thinking about the chords. I'm thinking about the tones of those chords as they relate to E minor. Mostly what I'm thinking about is just, which is just straight up E minor. That can get you in a lot of trouble, but at the same time, if you develop an ear for the different notes in that scale and how they relate to the chords that you're working with, then it kind of ends up working out. So like if we start this loop off, I know that the 6th degree of E minor, which is C, is going to be the 3rd of the first chord. Just like that. That was the 3rd. So, I kind of know that that is a good tonal center to keep during that first one, like this. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. Oh well. Like that. That was just an A minor 7 arpeggio. Notice how it doesn't quite sound like it works all the time over all the chords. In fact, it sounds pretty out of place. To me at least. To you, might sound like the coolest thing in the world. But that's part of the reason why I call this the key of E minor. So, like, listen if I play an E minor 7. To me, that sounded way more in and not as out there. So, like, if I try it again with B minor, a B minor 7, let's hear what that sounds like. So that sounded also pretty out, but at the same time that one sounded better to me than the A minor. So this is kind of the sucky part. You got to figure out what works best for you in order how to best navigate the changes, which is in itself the most daunting task of all time. I don't know the best way to go about doing that. And I mean, I bet if you asked anybody, they would say the same thing. It's just a matter of hearing and kind of developing an ear for how you should personally go about doing that and what works best for your own voice. All right, let's move on to kind of some phrasing stuff, because this is a huge problem with up-and-coming musicians that I've noticed. People don't seem to develop phrasing with soloing. A lot of the time, and I used to be the same way, when people would tell me to solo, it was just... And it may sound kind of cool to undeveloped ears that aren't musicians and such, but you're just leaving no room for any variation in your tone or your volume or anything like that. And a solo should really have a rising and falling kind of a shape to it if you want it to emote more than just what I just did. And some people are super timid and they just do really simple stuff, which to me is better than doing all that other stuff the whole time. Like, I mean, look at B.B. King, someone like that. Very simplistic soloing, yet everyone knows who he was, obviously. So the problem is trying to figure out the best way to go about not doing that stuff anymore. Especially when doing something over a progression like this that's very slow and mellow. Something like this, you want to start out very slow and mellow. Leave a lot of space in between. If you're playing constantly, it gives the listener no room to kind of digest what you're trying to do or to really understand what you're doing. So leave a lot of space. So like that. I tried to leave a lot of space in between. That whole time, nothing but E minor, straight up E minor, using all the interesting tones that are kind of left out of E minor pentatonic, which kind of leave out the tasteful tones, I think. But at the same time, tends to be very straightforward. Not a lot of variety going on out there. Sticking very much with single notes most of the time. And that's one thing. I started to do some stuff like that, which is something that a lot of bassists don't practice enough, which is inversion type stuff. So like if I'm talking about sixths, what I'm talking about is going from like the root, E, up to the sixth note of the scale, C. And just moving that pattern around. And that gives you, it just kind of opens up your horizon, makes you think a little bit differently. Because we tend to think, especially bass players, about like scalar, especially given E minor pentatonic, which there's a little bit of variety in that, but still very scalar, up, down, and that's another thing that people tend to do a lot in soloing, just up, down, up, down. You kind of want to stick around it. That's way more interesting than doing that a few times. So, where was I going? Sixths. So one thing to do with something like this, I'll start the loop again. Like with six, they can add a lot of tone. Or like that, that's a fifth. Going to a sixth. Going to a seventh. Now, I'm not saying like if you're doing something that's six, you just have to move around in sixths. Like right there, I moved from a fifth to a sixth to a seventh. Something like this. So fifth. It sounds very plain and simple right now. But with the chords, it has a much more varied tone because you have the contrast of the chords changing along with what you're doing. So like, let's see. And I was moving the top, or you could do like, that's a fifth. If you move the lower note, that's a sixth. That's a seventh. You're just keeping the top note the same. All right, so anyways, adding variation, stuff like that. Probably the most important part is phrasing, which I talked about a little bit, leaving plenty of space, but also tone. And tone is really tough to talk about because it's a lot in the fingers. And with that, it's very tough to teach. It's technique is a large part of it. Right hand and left hand. For me, I know I always keep my thumb kind of right back here on the back of the neck. And my right hand, every day strike through like most bass players. An important distinction is look at how my fingers are doing it versus how I've seen a lot of kind of newer bassists try to do something like this where they're kind of plucking from more the bottom instead of letting your fingers roll kind of off the side and hitting the lower string below it. And then, you know, a lot of people use three fingers too, which can be pretty confusing. It's one of those things you just have to practice it until you get better at it. But I usually use two fingers most of the time when I'm doing anything. But one of the big things that helps me with tone is making sure that I'm keeping my fingers doing that. Coming, just rolling across the string, across the top of it. You're not pulling, because that takes too much work. you're just kind of lightly doing that. And as far as the right hand, left hand, notice how I tend to have my right, man, I can't talk anymore. My index finger kind of curves in like this. I tend to do that everywhere when I'm playing, but I just kind of always make sure my thumb is anchored a little behind my index finger. And it's all about getting both of these to work together. That is extremely difficult. There are tons of exercises you can find online that helped me out, helps everybody out, especially everybody kind of knows this one, I kind of need to work on that apparently. It just helps to coordinate your fingers, help them work together better. That kind of stuff is super important, helps out a lot. Anyways, back to the idea of soloing. Tone is very important, obviously. Phrasing, very important. Not doing crazy stuff the whole time. And mixing up the chord tones is also a huge, huge thing, like I was talking about before. Knowing kind of what tones in the scale work to your favor and not just sticking within the scale, because that can just sounds very bland. And people won't really cling to your soloing as much as they might to someone else who has spent more time kind of just listening and hearing the tones and hearing what works with the tones. So I'm just going to do some playing, and I'll probably hit some wrong notes. And if I come across anything odd or interesting, I'll stop and I'll talk a little bit more about it. So here we go. I'm just going to play a little bit, and I'll try my best to, I'm going to stay mostly within the scale. If I go a little bit out of the scale, I'll talk about that a little bit. So I couldn't help myself any longer. So I went a little bit out. I started with something like, notice how that's not an E minor. That is a D sharp. And what does that imply? It's a tone, it's the major seventh of the key, and what it does, it makes you want to go back to E. I did something kind of similar to that. And what it is, it's just an interesting flavor note that you can toss in there to kind of aid the listener's ear to find home and to just add a little bit of flavor. So I did something. Another note that's not in the key. That is an A sharp. It's a flat 5 in the key, and it's not in there at all. But it didn't sound super terrible. Here, I'll try that again. Now, why did that not sound as terrible? Like, see, if I just hit that note and don't take it anywhere, it's just going to sound awful. Even if you add some rhythm, it sounds awful. But now let's resolve it. And suddenly, all that tension you built up is paid off, and it works way better. Like now it just sounds normal. Or if you go down, And that's a really important thing to remember with soloing. When we're doing just like E minor pentatonic stuff, there is almost no tension created, aside from if you hit a note that doesn't quite work with the chord that you're over at the moment. But when you create that tension and resolve it, it has this, it's like a deep breath. It's like, oh God, I can finally relax. It was resolved. And that is kind of the most important thing you want to do with soloing. You want to create this tension and then resolve it to give your listener a sense of relief. Some people don't resolve it and it drives you bonkers. I've seen it. But here, so like that was just melodic bullshit. It was B, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, C, B. But I resolved it. So now that previous message that I put across to your brain sounds, doesn't sound quite as bad. And the payoff is always important. You always kind of want to end on something that's in the key. Even if you start doing weird stuff like just chromatic, end with something that kind of brings you back into the key. That note is about as out as you can get. It's the major third of E, and we're in a minor key, so it just... But you bring it back to the main tonal center. Notice how I tend to get very quiet for some parts, and then I'll dig in a little bit more. When I'm very quiet, I tend to play more up towards the neck. Gets you a little more tone, even though you kind of lose a bit of the tension you want from the string. I also tend to move back towards the pickup anyways, because that's my comfort spot. And when I want to kind of dig in a little bit more, I move back to the bridge pickup back here. There's the most tension back there, and it gets you a much more mid-rangey sound, like, as opposed to, it sounds a little more whole right here, but back here, little more bite, a little more sharpness to it. Cuts through a little bit more. And another way to accentuate that, like this whole time I've been playing with both pickups active. Like if I go to just the bridge pickup. As you can tell, that has more bite, and also what I was just doing, which I kind of liked. All I was thinking about right there was a C major 7 triad, which is in the key of E minor. but we tend to think about just E minor and kind of forget about the other chords. So just something like that. I'm thinking of C Lydian. Now, this is where the weird theory stuff comes in. C Lydian, exact same as E Aeolian. Same notes. It just kind of prompts your brain to think about it differently. There I ended on E, which is the third of C, but we're in the key of E minor. But I was thinking in C major. See how I hit that completely wrong note? F. In the key we have an F sharp. And I tried to save it. Kind of worked. It's just a matter of getting used to not doing the standard thing that musicians tend to do, which is if you hit a wrong note, we tend to be like, ah, shit, and move off of it as quick as possible. You don't want to do that. You want to start adding the bad notes to your repertoire. So let's try that. I'm going to just play that again. Like I just moved it up chromatically until I got to a note that I thought fit well with the chords, or I could go down. Ended up on the fifth of E, B. That's the biggest thing to kind of, I think, advance your solo playing, is knowing that if you hit a wrong note, it's not the end of the world. It'll look way worse if you just get off it quick, as opposed to trying to figure out a way to get out of there melodically. And something that'll be much smoother than just making a bad face and thinking, oh God, I gotta get off that. Anyways, I should probably stop. See, I can't even talk anymore. I should stop talking. That's a lot for people to think about. I may have kind of meandered all over the place, but I think I hit some basic points that especially help my playing, help my soloing out a lot. I hope this has been helpful to everyone. If not, once again, as with the last video, tell me I'm the worst human being of all time. But otherwise, I hope this has been helpful. I hope this works. If you have any questions or want me to do anything else about any other type of playing or methods or techniques, please comment. Let me know. And I hope this helps you out a little bit. One thing, really get in on your theory. Start to learn that stuff. I mean, I didn't get super theoretical. I did some chromatic-y stuff, but basically tried to think of it as in the key of E minor. So, but there are a lot more advanced ways to look at that kind of stuff, which I don't want to go into because it's too much work. Anyways, thanks for watching. Hope this has been helpful. Have a good day, and let me know if you need any help with anything. I'll try and help you out. Thanks.